We're here to talk about accessing public sector funds in order to support the various activities that you're involved in. And without knowing who you are and without having any advanced questions to sort of be able to focus on, I think the biggest question that I'm encountering in my work, and so I work for the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, is just what's the expectation of funders in a time when it's unknown how the pandemic might affect your plans. And in the funding relationship, how does that then, you know, how does it change things? Does it change things? And at the department, with the various programs that are providing financial support to the arts and cultural sectors, the general sort of word of mouth is this: go ahead, plan as you must, and if things don't work out because restrictions, because of safety protocols, because of change in plans, that's okay. That's the reality of the situation we're in. And the fact that you have come up with an idea or have something that you're intending to do, if we saw it as a good idea and we've invested in it as funders, then that's something that we'll want to support no matter what. And the timing of it becomes less of an issue. The question of doing it in a way which is going to be have the greatest impact and be safe for everyone involved, that's more important. So I can, speaking for my program, we've stopped talking about investing in the final outcome, and what we are talking about is investing in the capacity, investing in the operations, investing in the ability to survive ultimately. So that's kind of what it comes down to. And I know that that doesn't help to solve the question of, well, what do we do if things change? But I think it hopefully provides some reassurance that we're not going to be knocking on your door and saying you need to give us the money back. We're not going to be saying to you, well, you have to adapt somehow and do something different. If you can, that's great. But where it's not practical, and often it isn't, there isn't an expectation on the part of most funders that you're somehow going to conform and change just because you have to use that money within a certain time frame. Um, how do I see, Joel? Can I see the questions in chat, or because I just feel like I'm talking to myself right now?
You sort of are, David. Feel free to keep presenting. There's no questions thus far.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I invite everyone. I see that there's 15 participants. I know that much. So, if you have questions, I invite you to submit them, please. I'd really love to know, what your thinking is, what your experiences have been. I've just figured out how to see who's here. So I see Ann Letterman's here, and I see Jay Pullman's here. So hello, hello, hello. Sarah Porter's here. Yeah, what are the questions that are on your minds? What are the things that you're facing that could be shared with everyone? Because obviously, the more we can connect with one another, I think the better off we are. One of the things that at Canadian Heritage we have been trying to be in regular contact with here in Ontario with the Ontario Arts Council and its advisors, in Toronto with the Toronto Arts Council. We've been speaking with Trillium. We've been in contact with the Canada Council, the various ministries, because we're all facing the same issues and we're all facing the same dilemmas and questions. And yeah, there are different, what the Ontario government decides to do has a particular impact on those organizations that we support in Ontario, but it's different in Quebec and it's different in Nova Scotia. So that's made it challenging, to say the least, to be coherent in what we're doing, because we're at the beck and call of the politicians and their medical advisors. And I think we all know that there is a great deal of difference between one jurisdiction and the next. And that too makes it hard to plan things. What else can I tell you? I can tell you that at our end, and I'm speaking specifically of Canadian Heritage, our workload to to deliver the various new funds that have been provided to support organizations and individuals through these times has tripled our workload. And the happy news that I can share with all of you is that for the first time since 2007, which is when I was hired at Heritage, um, they've provided additional support to expand our operational base. So we'll actually have I'll have some new colleagues to work with and help to deliver this program. And it couldn't come at a better time because honestly, we're burnt out. We're beyond our ability to deliver. There's people taking sick leave. There's one person who's decided to retire. And from what I'm hearing at the Ontario Arts Council and the other funding agencies, it's the same situation for them. We've become more than just a transactional relationship in terms of here's how you do the application, we assess the application, and we provide you with the results and the various administration of it. We've had to really become truly involved as advisors and to build a relationship that goes far beyond just that sort of the the technical side of applications. I think that's really good. It's for those of you who know me, that's been my approach all along. And to see everyone else kind of now find themselves in the position of having to be much more empathetic, much more attentive and sensitive to the circumstances that we find you in, has made I think it's making for a more fulsome and hopefully a more creative kind of exchange, because the cliche is we're all in this together, but that's not necessarily the way it truly has been. It's only maybe moving towards that. I see a 1 beside the Q&A, so I'm going to press on that and see. Sara. Hello, Sara. David, can you talk a little bit about the types of organizations that the Canada Arts Presentation Fund funds, and what the hope might be on how, if that trickles down the chain to the rest of the industry? Yeah, good question. It might be good for this crowd to just understand a bit of the money flow. Yeah, that's a great question. So CAPF supports organizations that are involved in the presentation of arts and culture. So the groups that are supported, and this is across the country, all regions, all territories, we're supporting organizations that put on a festival on an annual basis. The Mariposa Folk Festival is an example. We also support organizations that are that own theaters and are putting on a season of presentations. And most often they're based in cities and towns where it's a municipally owned theater, and it's putting on a multidisciplinary year of presentation. Usually it starts in the fall, ends in the spring, in order to allow for the summer festival season. And within those seasons, there's music, there's dance, there's theater. It could be comedy, spoken word, circus. There's often work for young audiences as well. We also support volunteer organizations that are in towns that don't have municipal theaters. So for example, I work with the folks up in Red Lake, Ontario, and they put on, it's called the Red Lake Wilderness Entertainment Series. And this group of volunteers will program a season. Usually it's somewhere between 6 to 8 shows, and they present it to either in the local Legion or at the local high school, and so on. We also support increasingly ad hoc collectives. They don't have to be incorporated, and those typically are coming from communities that are less that have been marginalized and less supported than the more mainstream communities. So I'm talking about Black, Indigenous, racialized communities, LGBTQ plus. So we support the gamut of whatever is presentation. And our priorities within that are to support organizations that are not focused on the mainstream. They're looking at, supporting emerging artists, supporting a diversity of genres, supporting uh, uh, presenting work for communities and audiences that maybe aren't well supported, well represented within larger institutions. So in Toronto, that comes out as we support lots of organizations that are smaller and are focused on their particular communities. But then as you move out through Ontario, it changes depending on the community that presentation is taking place in. And in the last couple of years with my program, we have really focused on trying to get a handle on what equity represents. When I say equity, I'm talking about the idea of examining the existing structures, the systemic issues that have been created through colonialism, through the type of privilege that has been afforded certain genres because they were here first, or they weren't here first necessarily, but they were the ones that were first funded through the creation of the Canada Council over 60 years ago. And it's been, this is something we wrestle with. This is something that's caused a lot of conversation. And I think the value in doing this is that it's taking us to a place where our programs recognize the responsibility we have and the impact we can have in terms of supporting growth and development within communities. And I think how that works within the world of folk music, by and large, is to recognize that it's an incredibly diverse community. There is, unfortunately, as I think we all know, a stereotype attached to the concept of a folk musician and a folk festival and a folk community. And it's firmly rooted in the development of folk festivals in the late 50s and early 60s. What it doesn't take into account is how things have evolved, grown, just continue to shift and expand. So my program has just this year, we have created what's known as an EDI, so Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Assessment Tool. And we piloted it this past April when at that deadline, I can't remember how many files we received, but it was over 30. So we decided that we would take this assessment tool, which is intended to provide us with the means to examine what organizations that we're supporting do. And we're going to put equity right in the center. So it's, instead of it being sort of a bonus or an add-on, it becomes the framework through which all the questions we ask will be filtered. It was pretty interesting because the results in our process, so we have a section which deals with artistic vision. We have a section which deals with your community outreach, your partnerships, your relationships to artists, and then there's a section about your operations. So how are you doing in terms of management? How are you doing in terms of finances? Then we used to have a tack-on section at the end, which was the bonus. So are you serving underserved communities that are a priority for our program and the government to support? And how well do you do it? And that used to, what it did is it didn't acknowledge organizations that have put equity as a center point of what they do. Instead it acted as a tack on. So now with this new lens, it becomes the center point. And what it did is it changed the scores for certain organizations that paid lip service to that particular priority, but weren't necessarily invested in a long-term basis. So in other words, they were doing it because they thought that that's what we wanted them to do. and that's not the case. It's like this is something that I think as society has come to realize we need to deal with these issues. We have to acknowledge what Black Lives Matter represents. We have to acknowledge what the reconciliation um, plan that was brought forward through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and its calls to action. They're not. This is not something which is a superficial. You do it now and then later on we forget about it. This is a part of our lives from now on. And the tool that we developed is, I think, will become a means for our program, and then I think it will ultimately filter through and be used by all the different funding programs of Canadian Heritage. So building communities through arts and heritage, museums assistance program, cultural spaces, the community support, multiculturalism and anti-racism program, official languages, they'll all use it, because I think everybody sees that it really is a helpful way to try and go forward through what are some pretty challenging circumstances. I think the benefit ultimately for everyone involved in the ecosystem, so from the presenters to the producers to the creators, all the ancillary, so production, design, is that it's going to it's level the playing field, make it more obvious what the process is. It should open up channels of communication and opportunities, perhaps for those who have felt like they're not welcome, they're not included. And I don't think it's an overnight, sensation. I think it's going to be quite a bit of work to really make this feel comfortable. But I think that that's something that would be really helpful. I just saw something pop up from Devon, but I don't know what that was. Does anyone else have other questions that they would like to offer? Because thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that question.
I encourage you, yes, to put in your questions. Devon's comment, David, is the people in this panel would probably be interested to know that CAPFA is a major contributor to the artistic and overall presentation budget for a festival like ours. It would be impossible to do it without CAPFA.
Right. Thanks, Joel. So Devon is correct. The Canada Arts Presentation Fund. When you line up, okay, who supports the festivals? So there's the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, perhaps Factor, the Canada Music Fund, the Canada Council, maybe, and depending on where your festival is based, provincially, you might have access to the Arts Council. What makes our funding different, and has only recently begun to be articulated in this way, is that we're supporting the operations. We're supporting the actual. It's not the festival itself we're investing in, it's the organization we're investing in. So we want to, when we provide support to Trout Forest, we are trying to make sure that Devon gets paid properly, that they can actually pay for someone to do the finances and the accounting. And should they choose, they could have an executive director, for example. It's that kind of investment that has become okay for us to talk about. And I think, here I am, I'll say this on record since we're recording it. It helps to have a government that has told our programs that we need to, when they were created more than 20 years ago, this one in particular, it was, I think, with the intention of supporting festivals to expand the range of artists that they programmed from across the country. And that remains a priority. It's great to be able to think that your festival can book artists from across coast to coast and bring them to your community, especially, and to do so, and if maybe to you're choosing to do that and to program an artist in that way creates a tour for them, and then so ensues the opportunity. But increasingly, what we recognize is that our money is really to make sure that the nuts and bolts stay together and can be strengthened. And where it might be beneficial, it's going to diversify or expand or contract, but focus, whatever it might be. But in the end, it's really about making sure that the organization will be able to accomplish what it sets out to do in the best way possible, for the benefit of everyone that it touches and involves in that project. It's so weird talking to myself. So I appreciate you all listening to me, and
You're
you're
doing a great job talking to yourself, David.
Yeah.
But but why
I
don't
used to work at a community radio station, and there was a program that was called Talking to Myself. So I guess maybe I learned from that.
maybe perhaps is there anything that your fund is working on in the hopper, things that people should watch for coming in the future?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So yes, at the federal level, you may recall that in the spring budget, the minister announced that there would be an allocation, and I'm going to make this up. I think it's around $300 million, which will be used towards reopening and recovery. And to date, we have no details of what exactly that will look like and what the timing of its delivery will be. I think it's safe to say that it probably will be delivered through existing programs such as the Canada Arts Presentation Fund. But then again, because there are new funds to hire new staff at Canadian Heritage, that may mean that it will become a separate program unto itself with a limited run. I don't know, but the good news will be for those of you who have an existing event or have a venue, it is very likely that you will be entitled to and lined up for additional support to sort of really look at, okay, what at a point where, let's all imagine a day when the COVID-19 crisis is over. It's hard to imagine right now, but let's imagine that day. What does it take? And even if that day doesn't come, ultimately, we as a whole need to figure out, what do you do in order to get active again? What do you do to be able to put on shows or to tour or to create work? So whatever that takes, this money will help to create the process. If there's additional safety considerations to be made, if there has to be renovations or changes to sites, to venues, all of that I think is going to be highlighted in what comes with this. But that's as much as I can tell you. I really don't know, and I'm not privy to the conversations at the higher levels, where I'm sure this is a burning discussion. What's happening right now is that the federal government has continued its financial support of my program, the Cultural Spaces Fund, building communities through arts and heritage, as it had in the previous 2 fiscal years. And what I mean by that is that we're allocated a set amount of money each year. And in the budget for 2019, for the first time in 11 years, our programs were provided with what was a 2-year increase. And that allowed us to provide what we called supplements to all of the existing organizations that we support. The happy news was that with the spring budget of this past year, the minister continued that support for this year and for next year. So that means for all of the organizations that my program, Building Communities for Arts and Heritage, supports, that they will receive a minimum of a 10% top up. If it's an Indigenous-led organization or a Black-led organization, it will get 20%. So those supplements, now that the government is back in business, and the caretaker convention that was imposed on us when they called the election, which stopped all business, You should see, if you are currently supported by the program, you'll receive that supplement in the next few weeks, certainly in before the end of November, depending on how bad our bureaucracy behaves. What else can I tell you?
Well, you've got about 15 minutes left, David. I also encourage everyone, this is your chance to ask any of your funding questions. Please put them into the Q&A or into the chat.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I've been working at Canadian Heritage. I live here in Toronto, so Takaranto, the Treaty 13, and my background is in, I've done arts journalism. I worked at CBC Radio for a long time. I've worked in community radio at Ryerson, soon to be renamed. I have transitioned from that into being a programmer. I worked at Harbourfront Centre. I had a hand in starting the Toronto Blues Society. I had a hand in starting Planet in Focus, which is an environmental film festival. And I've had my own production company doing event planning and production. So I came from the sector at the point in which they hired me. And I think they hired me because they wanted people like me, and there were others that were hired at the time who had experience and could actually speak in a knowledgeable way about what's happening. Going forward right now, as we look for new people to join, and it's not just in Ontario, this is across the country, and also at our, what we fondly call headquarters, so the people in Gatineau, is we want to hire people who are from the sector that would be interested in contributing to what I would say is a time of change, because there really is a concerted effort to address some of the systemic issues. Racism is one of them, but that's not the only one. There's systemic issues in terms of how, the type of language we use is very colonial. The definitions of what is an arts-based activity are very, very narrowly focused. The definitions of organizations that are, an arts organization are also narrowly focused. And what I see is a recognition that perhaps these things have been harmful and a desire to do something about it. So it's kind of a cool time to be involved in heritage. It sounds like I'm making a pitch to you to maybe throw your resume my way, but all that to say, this is a time of change. And so coming back to why I brought this up in the first place, as someone who worked in the sector when I joined, I really felt like my relationship isn't to judge you, and it isn't to be an officer, because that was the title that I was given at the time. I'm not a cop, and I'm not here to police and judge. What I am here to do is to help you to navigate a really difficult bureaucratic system that we've created, and as much as possible, support your success, support your growth, support your desires. And I was kind of the odd duck for the longest time. And for those of you who've known me for a while, that's been a struggle for me, is that, how do I fit in a place where I don't really feel like anyone else is like me? So it's thrilling to see this change. I feel like instead of being a chorus of one, I'm now joined by many. And I think that the more voices that join this, the greater the likelihood that we can actually succeed in creating some positive change. So, I offer that as encouragement for any of you who, if you don't have a relationship with heritage, and there are things that we might be able to support you in doing, then don't be afraid to reach out. Recently, within Ontario region, Peter Zwarich, who is the founder of River and Sky Music and Camping Festival, he's now working with the region. He's working on the Cultural Spaces program. Kayla McGee, who was the executive director with Small World Music, and then later with the Music Gallery, she has now also joined us and is working half-time with my program and also with Cultural Spaces. So there really is, I just see this great potential for a group of us, to get together, brainstorm what's happening, talk to you guys, bring that back, And then, so goes the development. And the next vista is to reach the people in Gatineau who don't get out very often and have kind of been isolated perhaps for a long time in their careers. There's a wasp that I just batted away, and get them on board, because they need to understand that this is happening not just in Ontario. This is all the regions, as far as I can see, are involved in examining what their purpose through funding as funders are, and how can they do a better job? How can they be more look at it as a relationship, as instead of it just being a transactional kind of thing.
David, we do have a question from Jessica Pearson here. What are things artists should add into our grants to make us stand out or help us to be more likely to receive grants?
That's a great question, Jessica. So, full disclosure, at Heritage, we support organizations. We don't support the individual artists themselves. But I think the message that we've been giving to organizations, which is, and a part of this is, we need to ask the right questions. We need to give you the platform to tell us the story that you want to share. And I would say that we haven't necessarily done a great job of doing that, but it's being examined. Literally this afternoon at 1:30, I have a meeting with colleagues from across the country, and we are looking at our application form, and we are going to talk about the real kinds of questions we should be asking. So I don't know when, but soon there'll be a new application form, hopefully, that does a lot better job of supporting you telling your story. So that's the key, is that for anyone who makes a grant application, regardless of it doesn't matter which organization it is, you really have to be clear about what your need is, what's its relationship to, who you would like to receive it, and what does that do at that point. It sounds kind of like a socialist manifesto, but that's not how I intend. That's not what I'm meaning. I just think that so often there isn't a lot of the relationship between that funder and whoever is the applicant is distant. And that, unfortunately, is the reality of, in most cases, the person who might be your contact with that fund has no time to actually connect with you. And there also is the circumstance where, who is it that reads your application and makes decisions about it? So the better informed you can be about, so who's the person who's your liaison and how do you connect with them? And also to get a sense of who will be ultimately making decisions about your application becomes important. Because, if it's peer review, if it's, you're making an application in order to support the recording of a recording, what's the mindset of the people who might be reading it? And what do you need to provide them so that they can fully understand and appreciate what you're having to do and what that will accomplish? So plain speak becomes a pretty important tool, I would say. But I also, me personally, I like reading applications where I can hear the voice of the person who's writing it. I can get a sense of their passion, their artistry, their the vision that they have. It's not to say that hiring a grant writer isn't it could be a good thing, but it really depends on what's your relationship with that person and how well can they encapsulate what you do. Lots of people do hire someone else to put it on paper because that may not be your forte, but just be really sure that you are involved in whatever is written and is going to be offered before it's offered. At Heritage, we have an unusual ability, which is you can write up an application, you can submit it, and I can look at it before it actually gets to the final process. The other thing that I like about our process is that once the application is made, it's not the end. We still can we can come back to you after it's been reviewed by committee And I can share with you that, oh, well, a couple of my colleagues had questions about X, Y, and Z, and I can ask you to clarify that, and I can use that information as a part of the final assessment and recommendation. So that's one of the advantages, I would say, to building a relationship with your advisors at Canadian Heritage. Of course, it's an entirely different process with the councils. But they too are changing. Some of them aren't using peer review anymore. It's the officer, the advisor, who is providing the input, and it's an internal decision. So in a case like that, as hard as it may be, it really behooves you to, if you can, have a conversation. You know, preferably real time. Probably not in person because that's pretty hard to do. But yeah, that's a long-winded answer to it. It really comes down to just being crystal clear about what it is that you intend to do, and offering it in a way which really helps whoever is reading it to get a sense of who you are and what you want to do. Joel, is there anything else that's come up since then?
Yeah, we've got, I think we have time for one last question from Jay. Could you share some tips on writing grants as an independent artist or songwriter in terms of funding albums and touring? This is similar to the last question, but I guess specifically to touring, Jay himself has had some feedback in the past of being being too modest with his goals.
No, that's interesting. Well, gosh, all the funders, we're not all alike, no surprise, right? And touring, which is often supported, on a national level through the Canada Council, what I hear anecdotally from friends who are musicians, or I know folks in theater as well who are supported in the same way. Yeah, it's kind of like, if you don't have a grand ambition, and if you're not going to, really pull the stakes out and go for it, somehow that's seen as you're having a lack of vision, like that you're not perhaps going as far. You're not ready yet for the support that they might want to provide someone else. So I think where you decide that you want to target something. Okay, so I want to perform in a particular region, and I want to go to X, Y, and Z, communities or cities. The more you can articulate that the reason you are going to do a 6-show tour is because this is what it will do in terms of building your audience or building a relationship with certain organizations and communities, that's a pretty hard argument for funders to overlook. And I do think that, you have to think about what's workable within your means and what will best serve your interests. Because if you shoot for the moon, and say you're going to do this and you don't, two things happen. One is that, in your reporting back, it may be perceived as somehow you didn't, you aren't the artist that you thought you were, and it wasn't a success. But I think even worse, it's how you feel, because you've got to feel like, what you're doing is to support your interests and the goals and the aspirations that you've set up in terms of whatever you've created and what you want to offer. And I think, a lot of times it's that disconnect that really it harms the art, harms the artist, and it can be detrimental to you going forward in another project. And I think the beautiful thing about the folk music community is that it tends to, I find you to be really genuine people who are foundational in terms of your relationship to art and culture and the environment. And as time has gone by, it's become like you are becoming more and more the center of that conversation related to music. And the industry, which used to rule the world, well, you can see that it's pretty marginalized now. It doesn't have a lot to offer in terms of that level of commitment. It's simply on the transactional, superficial basis. So funders need to get it around their heads, and this is a challenge to anybody who talks to Factor, to understand that that's what they need to be doing. And certainly that's my conversations with my colleagues and friends at Factor, is that, you know, they need to do more to support genuine work, which is going to be, you know, really healthy, and do all the other kind of cool things that great music, great lyrics, great performances do for people. If I could leave you with a quick short story. So, you know, the not being able to go and see live music, I had a couple occasions last summer where in the neighborhood that I live in, lots of musicians and artists here. So a couple folks were organizing front porch or front lawn performances. So that was nice. But you know, so you're sitting in your chair and, you know, you can drink your beverage and take it in. But a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to go to High Park, which is a beautiful green space here in Toronto, and they have an outdoor amphitheater, which is it's in the woods, trees all around, and I got a chance to see Jeremy Dutcher perform live. Yeah, just talking about it, I could almost cry for you right now, because it was I have missed so much what you do as musicians, and I was so grateful to be there. It was a safe space. And then also it was the joy of seeing Jeremy in that outdoor, you know, he was communing with the crickets. It was incredible. The stars were out, and everything that I love about music just came rushing back. I can't wait to be able to see more performances, and I know that that is coming, and you know, all of you are struggling with it and are involved in making that happen. So keep it up. Don't, you know, these are hard times, but this is what needs to happen. This, whatever we're doing right now, is the right thing to do, because, you know, we're kind of making it up as we go. But I want you to know that as funders, we really care about seeing you succeed. And I think the evolution of the funding world is much more recognizing the responsibility, recognizing the role that we can play in a positive means. We're not telling you what to do. We want to support what you want to do. That's the change.